scandal and potential criminal liability even. The real existential crisis for this young presidency and this young administration is the Russia crisis. The management and handling of that crisis in the White House has been sort of an unusual spectacle to report on. The frenetic pace of the turnover of White House senior staff, the colorful and profane cast of characters who the president has brought in as his various lawyers on the issue. It's been weird and sometimes astonishing to watch in terms of the way this White House has handled this scandal and its fallout already. But when it comes to the more important question, when it comes to the bottom line question, when it comes to how the country is going to determine the way this scandal will end, how the congressional committees will conduct and conclude their investigations, how Congress will react to its own investigations, as well as to whatever we eventually learn from the special counsel investigation at the FBI, that ultimate response, which is the most important thing for the country, that is not going to be determined by what the White House does. And it's not going to be determined by what the press does. It will be determined in a granular sense, largely by Republicans, especially if it happens soon while Republicans still control Congress. If you think there are eventually going to be impeachment proceedings, if you think the congressional investigations are going to be consequential and their findings are going to be made known, all that kind of stuff will be decided by the people who run Congress. And at least until the midterm elections, that's congressional Republicans. And that fact, the fact that at least, until January after the next midterms, the fate of this presidency is in the hands of congressional Republicans, that, if nothing else, makes the strain between the White House and elected Republicans not just human drama in Washington. It makes it potentially an existential matter for this presidency. And of all the things that have driven this strain between the president and elected Republicans, the most interesting dynamic, the most persistent and difficult problem for that relationship has turned out to be the president's expression of sympathy with the grievances of white supremacists and neo-Nazis who gathered for a rally and ultimately a riot in Charlottesville, Virginia. The president proclaiming sympathy with their grievances and solidarity with them over their affection for the Confederacy, his declaration that some of those guys were very fine people. That really has been a problem. Reportedly, it has been a problem for some senior White House staff who are working for this president, although you can take that as far as you can throw it, since none of them have actually resigned from the White House or threatened to resign in response to the president's remarks. But congressional Republicans, too, have described this moment, this problem, their discomfort with what the president said. They have described this sort of sotto voce as something that really bothered them, something that's made them feel like this presidency, maybe they're not going to go to bat to keep it going, if it comes right down to it. It's been interesting how much of a problem this has been, not just for the president's standing, not just for our soul as a nation, but specifically for his relationship with other Republicans. Here's what makes that supposed revulsion on the part of other Republicans, that those comments from the president being a supposed breaking point. Here's what makes that, at most, a Shakespearean drama, at least a crock, depending on how you look at it. White supremacists and neo-Nazis and white nationalists did not start rebranding themselves as the alt-right because Donald Trump got elected president. They didn't also come into existence because Donald Trump was elected president. The Heil Hitler, let's make a white homeland corner of American white extremism, it didn't suddenly spring out of the toilet it usually lives in because this guy got elected. The white supremacist nightmare edge of American politics, they started rebranding themselves as the alt-right years ago. And I hereby re-up for discussion the fact that well before this president moved on from reality TV, it was the Republican Party in Congress, before Trump, that started to insinuate these guys into otherwise mainstream Republican politics. Don't believe me? Watch this. This is what we did at the time. But we have to start tonight in Montana, at the headquarters of an organization that likes to think of itself as America's think tank for the white nationalist movement. They don't like to say white supremacist, apparently. They like to say white nationalist. They think it sounds better. You can judge for yourself.
Who stands for us? Have you ever wondered, why isn't there an organization that works for us? From African Americans to illegal immigrants, from lesbians to left-handers, every ethnic and interest group has its own lobby or cultural foundation. The exception, of course, is white Americans.
This is the white supremacist the white nationalist think tank group. They call themselves the National Policy Institute. Their slogan, you can see at the top there, for our people, our culture, our future. And when they say our, they are being really, really specific about who they mean.
As long as whites continue to avoid and deny their own racial identity, at a time when almost every other racial and ethnic category is rediscovering and asserting its own, whites will have no chance to resist their dispossession. This is our challenge. This is our calling. Won't you join us?
So if you poke around on the website of the white supremacist, white nationalist think tank, yeah, you can kind of see how they're trying to update the whole racist image. So yeah, some of them are still kind of skinhead-looking guys, but they wear suits, you know, and some of them have hair. But this is an old school kind of thing. This is, you know, no interbreeding, protect the sanctity of whiteness from the inferior races. It is exactly what you think it is with somewhat improved haircuts. If you dig into the fine print in their online web presence, you'll find that they're not just an online group. They do hold physical conferences and events and things. They also maintain a P.O. box in Whitefish, Montana. And it turns out that that is the exact same address, the exact same P.O. box for this online racist forum. And I saw a bunch of links to this today. We're all the Wayback Machine. I thought maybe it was down, but no, it's all still there. It is called the Alternative Right. And it's an online racist forum. It describes itself as being founded by the won't you join us white power guy who you just saw in the think tank video. This, for example, is their post on Holocaust Remembrance Day this past January. They call it Holocaust Amnesia Day. And under a picture of a pile of dead bodies from the Holocaust, it says, "I can't believe that it's crept up on me again. Today I discovered that today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and I'm fresh out of onions." The author goes on to describe his decidedly mixed feelings about commemorating a supposed historical event. And then he goes on to magnanimously propose that we leave aside for the moment the question of whether this whole Holocaust thing actually happened. So this is the real deal, right? This is Alternative Right, which lives in the same Whitefish, Montana P.O. box as the white supremacist think tank. This resinous, filthy, dank, racist little corner of the internet is relevant and is at the top of the news today because it is suddenly front and center in super mainstream American politics. This Aryan nation supremacy of the races crock is directly linked to the legislation that finally started getting its big markup in the United States Senate today, after months of buildup. Starting immediately after the presidential election, there was all this talk that the Republican Party was finally going to go along, or they were finally going to help see into law reform of our nation's royally screwed up immigration system. The writing was on the wall, right? After losing the presidency again, and losing seats in the House, and losing seats in the Senate, the writing was on the wall. The Republican Party had to get right with Latinos, at least, with Latino voters, and the way it was going to do it was by supporting immigration reform, finally. And even though the Beltway narrative is supposedly that Republicans see the light and Republicans support this now, it is really not clear that enough Republicans do support it that it's going to pass. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III of Alabama introduced 49 separate amendments to the bill today. And that is not because he's trying to help it along. And the most powerful conservative think tank in the country is really, really against it. The Heritage Foundation is leading the conservative opposition to anything getting done to fix the immigration system. And this is where the white supremacist problem comes in. So yesterday, it was Dylan Matthews at the Washington Post who looked up the credentials of the people who wrote the anti-immigration reform study for Heritage. And they found that one of the co-authors for the big Heritage study on this issue did his doctoral dissertation on American immigration policy, and specifically on the question of how we should shape our immigration policy to account for the fact that Latinos are so dumb. as a race. I'm only barely paraphrasing. The dissertation describes Latino immigrants as generally having an IQ that is, quote, substantially lower than that of the white native population. Quote, immigrants living in the U.S. today do not have the same level of cognitive ability as natives. Quote, no one knows whether Hispanics will ever reach IQ parity with whites, but the prediction that new Hispanic immigrants will have low IQ children and grandchildren is difficult to argue against. So not only are Latinos intellectually inferior to whites, but of course they breed. Ugh, it's disgusting, right? To be clear, this guy with the thesis that white people are just naturally smarter, he isn't some temp that the Heritage Foundation just bumped into and it turns out he has this embarrassing past. He has a titled position at the Heritage Foundation. He is a senior policy analyst for the Heritage Foundation. And even as they try to disavow his dissertation as if that's in his student past, that's the one little problem with him, today we learned, thanks to some digging by Chris Moody at Yahoo News, that this guy's whole record of public output is this same kind of stuff. I mean, here's another bylined article from him. This one's from March 2010. Model minority? Question mark? It's kind of a rhetorical question. You get the implication, right? Quote, Hispanics are in fact substantially more likely than whites to commit serious crimes. These findings are not due to age differences or immigration violations or other statistical artifacts. The reality of Hispanic crime should be one of the many factors we consider when setting immigration policy. That's not from some dissertation that somebody had to dig out of the Harvard Library. That's on the online machine. Specifically, that's on the online machine at AlternativeRight.com, the place where they are cutting up onions to make themselves fake cry over the fake Holocaust, where Republicans are becoming the party of misspelled burritos, where the Whitefish, Montana post office box lives with this guy, and where the Heritage Foundation's author of its immigration study is expounding on the inherent criminality of these brown people who we really ought to consider keeping out of this country. And when the Heritage Foundation, when the nation's leading conservative think tank, was considering hiring him, his most recent public output, the thing he was doing online the month before Heritage hired him, was writing about the racial inferiority and criminality of Latinos as a group. And this is the world where the Heritage Foundation went to find an author for their study of immigration reform. And wouldn't you know it, it turns out their study concludes that it is a terrible idea to reform immigration because these immigrants, and you know who we mean, these immigrants and their children, and inevitably their grandchildren, everybody in their bloodline, they are low-achieving parasites who will feed on the native-born population, and that will be very expensive. It's not at all fiscally responsible. And we learned all of this today about the character of the opposition to immigration reform in this country. We learned about who is leading the Republican charge against immigration reform on the day that immigration reform finally gets introduced in the Senate. That was our coverage back in May 2013 of the long-standing white supremacist movement in this country rebranding itself as the alt-right, and the Republican Party's willingness to dance with them for political purposes even then. President Trump's kind remarks about the white supremacists among us may be making elected Republicans now proclaim their discomfort. But there is a recent past for Republicans to reckon with on this. A recent past of Republicans and conservative groups like the Heritage Foundation really opening the door to those groups before Donald Trump was even known to be a Republican, let alone a Republican politician. I should also tell you that report, that Hispanics are parasites report, and therefore we shouldn't let them into the country, that report is still tonight proudly displayed on the website of the Heritage Foundation. It's still there. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.